Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. As always on Thursdays, my friend, the Generalissimo, Duane Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show, master of the universe, HUGHNIVERC.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. Remember, you should be a member by now. What the heck is wrong with you if you're not a member? Duane, I mean, what should people be doing other than signing up for the universe?
It's inflation proof. It has not gone up the way everything else has gone up, both in the consumer end of the universe and in the producer end of the universe. It's the same price it was last month and last year.
Yeah, that's true of the Ed Morrissey Show podcast too, but that's a low bar in the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. So there you go. We're going to get to inflation here. I think we'll start off with inflation. I know that there's, we get the Supreme Court stuff. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today too, and the Senate vote that took place yesterday. But, yesterday, the consumer price index came in at 8.3% year on year, core inflation 0.6% month on month. And at least a few people in the media treated it as though that was good news. This morning, they're going to have a more difficult time with it, though, because the producer price index, which is a leading indicator for the CPI, came in at a year on year 11%. 11%.
Well, except that what the lefties in media land and in the White House, what they're coming out with is, but they met expectations. We at least knew we were going to do this, and we didn't fail in our predictions, because month on month we only exceeded the producer prices by 0.5%.
Okay, now wait a minute, I mean, I get the expectations game. That's interesting in terms of investors. It's not interesting in terms of anybody else. This is like saying, we predicted that the Cleveland Browns weren't going to get into the playoffs, and so they've done a great job this year by not getting into the playoffs.
So here's what's going on. You're in a car, right? And you're driving the car, and you were going, the speed limit. You were going a rate of speed that was a safe, reasonable, comfortable speed. That's what the growth level should be. That's what the inflation rate should be. If you've got inflation at 2%, maybe 2.5%, that's a comfortable amount. Keeps up with GDP. Everybody's happy, right? You start leaning on that accelerator and you start speeding that car up, and you get into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, 8%, 9%. All of a sudden, people in the car are going, "Hey, slow this thing down. You're going way too fast. It's getting kind of uncomfortable in here," right? Well, last month, as it turns out with the numbers, the producer price index, which is, of course, what leads to what you end up paying in the consumer price in the next few months.
It's the inflation within the distribution chain. That's what the PPI measures.
Year on year, which tells you how far you've gone and how fast you've gone. It went from 11.2% as of March to 11.0% as of April. So you're rocketing down the road at a pretty good clip, right?
Right.
Now, the only thing that's changed is in March, month on month, which is your accelerator, it's your speedometer, if you will, that was at 1.4%, meaning if you stayed at that rate of speed that you were going, you were headed for a top speed of 15%, 14.5%.
Right.
Now it's at 0.5, meaning you've kind of backed off the accelerator. You're still going double the speed limit. You're still breaking the law. You're committing a felony, but you're just easing off the accelerator. You're still going faster, but you're just going faster a little. You're taking your time getting to a faster speed.
Right.
That's what this is.
Well, and here's the problem is that it's compounding. And
correct.
It's compounding. So it's still 11% higher than the prices were in April of 2021,
which was higher,
which had already started ticking up back then. And so the March basis numbers were actually lower than the April basis numbers in 2021. Right. Now I'm talking about, and I talk with this about King. We're gonna hear from King Banaian from St. Cloud State University, and also TwinCitiesBusiness.com. We have a sort of a deeper dive on inflation on the CPI.
Yes.
An actual economist. When we talk about this, we talk about the structural problems in the inflation that we're getting. So that'll be coming up a little bit later in the podcast, folks. But at any rate, the PPI here is an indication that the CPI is going to continue percolating higher. And the other part of this too, and we should make note of this, is that this has the same structural context. I'll say context, which is that there was a short decline in fuel prices in April, thanks to some gimmicky stunts that the Biden administration pulled with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has long since now evaporated, and prices are now back into record territory.
Record highs as of yesterday. So when the CPI, when the CPI went from 8.5% down to 8.3, it was chalked up to a slight softening in what fuel costs were for the month of April.
It's going to be the same thing here.
Right. Whatever that softening was is gone, because we are now at an all-time high in fuel prices, and May just began. So by the time we get to May's numbers, I'm not sure what else is out there that's going to be the deflationary pressure to offset that high fuel costs.
There's not going to be one, because with energy prices spiking back upward again, you're going to get
everything.
It affects everything. It's a force multiplier.
Correct.
In the distribution chain. It's a force multiplier for inflation, which is the reason why you want to keep it in fuel prices in check. Which brings us to the story that broke overnight in regards to inflation, which was that the Biden administration is going to cancel millions of acres of leases for oil and gas exploration, mostly offshore, some in Alaska. And
Is it possible that they have actually deluded themselves into believing that Americans will believe their spin, that the reason for all this is just because of greedy oil company executives?
Yes. I think
is that possible that that's the reasoning why? There's no basis in rationality to that argument, but could they have deluded themselves into thinking that, they'll buy this?
Sure. I think that they think that. I think that they have deluded themselves into thinking that. Even the Washington Post, though, in its report, this is a straight news report, you could see some of the head scratching going on, because they mentioned the fact that Biden is already promising oil and gas supplies to Europe, right? Exports, at the same time that he's cutting off, exploration and extraction leases here in the United States. And you could kind of see them almost trying to connect the dots there. It's like, well, wait a minute. How is this exactly going to work? Because the answer is it's not. He's cutting off supply at the time when he's increasing demand. And what that means is that you're going to have this inflationary spiral, especially in gas prices, for the foreseeable future. I mean, I would not be surprised. We're at, I think, $4.34 a gallon was the national average for all formulations last week. I wouldn't be surprised if we're up over $6 by the time we get past the midterms at this rate.
I would agree with you. I'm sharing on the screen. This isn't. You're a native Californian.
Am.
This is in Death Valley, California. Yesterday. You see what the gas prices are?
Yeah, I can see it. And the
$9 a gallon.
$9 a gallon.
$8.75 for the cheap stuff. $9.23 if you want to put the high octane stuff in your gas.
$10 a gallon for diesel. $10 a gallon for diesel.
$10 a gallon for diesel in Death Valley, California.
Which is the reason why you should never go to Death Valley, California. By the way, there are actually lots of reasons not to go to Death Valley, California, unless you're really interested in deserts.
I understand that, but I'm telling you, this is what the policy that we're seeing is getting. You think I'm kidding when I'm telling you $10 a gallon gas is on the way. We're headed that direction.
Yeah. I mean, just as an aside, though, if you ever find yourselves in Needles, California, find someplace else.
Keep driving. Keep driving.
Pay $10 a gallon to get the hell out of there. I mean,
driving.
Just keep driving. There are better places almost anything by definition is a better place than Needles, California. I
Yes.
probably have like 10 viewers in Needles, California who are going to send me emails about that. But hey, I've been through Needles. And unless it's changed in 30 years, which I doubt that it has.
Those people that are in Needles that are
I'm sure are fine folks, by the way. Fine folks.
I'm sure they are too, but those are people that ran out of gas money and are now working at the casino in Laughlin.
I think that's they're still stuck there. It's sort of like the California version of Nothing But Trouble. You remember that film?
Oh, I do. I do.
That was one of the
Chevy
worst.
Chase,
One of the worst films ever made,
and Demi Moore, right?
Yeah, one of the worst films ever made
John
with
Candy,
a real all-star cast. It's one of those
Yeah,
all-star bombs.
John Candy in a dual role.
Yes. A forgettable experience for everybody, but one that probably is more indelibly impressed on your brain. Anyway, to get back to this, I mean, we are going to see a continuing spiral here of inflation because the Biden administration simply refuses to deal with the underlying causes of it. One is the expansion of monetary supply. The Fed is going to try to take care of that. They're going to create a recession in doing so. Almost by definition now. I don't think they have any options other than the Volcker option. They may crawl up to it. They may try to get to it incrementally, but basically they're going to have to execute the Volcker option.
They've already done the half-point hike. They have to do another one. They've got to do at least two. They've got to do at least two more this year.
And I think they're talking about doing even more than 2 increases this year. That's how bad that this is getting. And I think the CPI and PPI numbers this month are not going to convince them to hold off.
No, I mean, again, you are at double-digit inflation with producer prices.
Yep.
and CPI. You got a breather, if you will, even though it's not really a breather. You had kind of a stable incline that was due to an event that is no longer in play right now.
Right.
And in fuel prices. So the sky's the limit.
Yeah, it really is at this point, because if we're going to continue to restrict supply, you're going to and demand continues to go up, you're going to end up
we're going to see nothing but increasing fuel costs.
Right. So the Biden administration has been trying to get ahead of this week. I mean, clearly they saw these reports coming. They've been trying to get ahead of this all week, Duane. Joe Biden's been on the stump talking about ultra MAGA Republicans, which, is sort of like a basket of deplorables thing.
It ain't working.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. In the meantime, you've got Congress working on everything but inflation.
But again, you had Barack Obama and you had Bill Clinton. Both of them at least had some charisma and had some retail political skills. They could sell the snake oil, right? They could
now, Duane. Are you saying that Scranton Joe doesn't have charisma? Why, just this, I think it was just yesterday, on your show, you showed me how much charisma he demonstrated towards his fellow Americans.
I did.
We got to get this clip in here somewhere.
You want to do it now?
Yeah, let's do it now, because, I mean, if you want to talk about charisma, Joe Biden is the anti-charisma. Here's Joe Biden trying to explain something that is like a term that's like 50 years old, and apparently has never actually sunk in with him.
Here's Big Joe.
We're the only nation in the world that has come out of every crisis stronger than we went in it.
Rah, rah, Joe.
Every single time.
Yes.
Regardless of what it was.
Right.
No other nation has done that.
Correct.
It's one of the reasons why in some places we're called the ugly Americans. We think we can do anything. We know we can do anything.
Wait, what?
What was this that? Nation leads the world. We stand up for freedom.
Did we change topics there and someone forgot to tell me?
The ugly Americans? We're the ugly Americans, says Joe Biden.
He was doing so good with the rah-rah stuff until wait, the ugly Americans.
The ugly Americans, yes. I mean,
that deals with something different, doesn't it?
It's completely different. This is apparently Joe Biden has memory problems. I don't know how to explain this other than to just say My Cousin Vinny opening statement. Hello, everything that man just said is bullshit. Thank you. The Ugly Americans is a reference to how Americans used to travel abroad. We were arrogant. We wouldn't learn the language. We expected everybody to Americanize things for us. We wanted to go visit, England and France and Ireland, and
we expected every country
Italy
in their language to speak English instead. And right,
not just speak English, but to have food prepared like it is in America. Have
cheeseburgers everywhere.
Yeah, cheeseburgers in paradise, to quote the great philosopher Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffett, yes.
Yeah, that's what ugly Americans meant. It had nothing to do with prevailing in crises.
Yeah, what does it have to do with crises?
It has nothing.
And resilience.
Nothing to do with crises and resilience. This is Joe Biden's sputtering brain just throwing, BS on the wall again. As I have often said on both of our podcasts, Duane, he is 20 pounds of bullshit in a 10-pound bag. And
yes, and I will note on this family-friendly podcast, you have gone blue twice.
I have.
I have failed to go blue once because I work for Salem, and I long for that 5.5% raise at some point that I was told I got from Joe Biden.
Well, you'll have to tune into the Universe's after show from last night to hear more about the 5.5% raises. I don't feel like poking the bear. I'll let Duane poke the bear on that one.
I don't. I'm just all out of giving creds.
All right. So in the meantime, while all this is going on and Joe Biden is telling us that we're ugly Americans for surviving crises, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, what were Democrats on Capitol Hill doing? Well, they were trying to pass the most radical abortion bill ever, because clearly that's the number one priority for the electorate, right? Was this bill.
They were trying to codify Roe by not codifying Roe, and basically demanding that taxpayers pay for abortions up through the middle of delivery in the birth canal.
Yes. And that was the bill that was being floated. Joe Manchin himself said, I would vote to codify Roe, but that's not what this bill does. This bill is a radical expansion of abortion in the United States, and I'm not going to vote for it.
Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who were both pro-choice Republicans, would have probably voted to codify Roe.
They had their own bill for it. Right. Chuck Schumer had the opportunity to adopt their bill, which would have been the smart political move. You and I talked about this.
Thank God for Mitch McConnell, and thank God for Chuck Schumer, who never seems to fail in the ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
So with that in mind, did you see Punchbowl's report this morning yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so Punchbowl's report this morning.
Tell me they didn't do what everybody else in media did, which is played the Republicans filibuster the bill bit.
No.
Because that's just disgraceful how media is trying to cover this.
I completely agree with you, but no, their coverage of this is frontliners freak. Okay. I'm going to read you from the Punchbowl report this morning. Frontline House Democrats, the party's most endangered incumbents this November, have been pressing party leaders in recent days to step up legislative efforts to save their majority. The roughly 30 House Democrats have long known the political headwinds are against them this year: redistricting, inflation, the ongoing blah, 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 blah. But many of these vulnerable Democrats returned to Washington after a week at home particularly spooked. Their frustrations are running high. They're worried about a lack of legislative victories in 2022, and they badly want Democratic leaders and committee chairs to push more bills that help address the concerns of everyday Americans. They've been in session for 16 months, and they're just finally coming around to the idea that, maybe we should ask voters what's actually important to them.
I saw a story in Politico last night on this feature piece on their canary in the coal mine, and that's Katie Porter, who is basically my Congress critter here in the studio. Although because of redistricting, we're going to move to a different district, and they've kind of reshuffled the lines, and thank God she won't be anymore. but they're worried she's going to lose her seat actually too, because as the Cook report said, that any Democrat incumbent in a single digit Biden district, single digits on down, is vulnerable right now. That's how bad the landscape is. But they start featuring Katie Porter, who's looking around going, I went to the grocery store and I picked up a package of bacon, and I looked at the price, and it was $9.99 for a package of bacon, and I put it back on the shelf. I couldn't justify putting it in the cart. And I'm thinking to myself, what could possibly have happened that bacon is that much in price?
What could possibly have happened?
And she's like, so I started telling my Democratic colleagues, have you looked at prices lately and how bad things are? We've got to do something about this. We've got to protect our phony baloney jobs. Can I get a harumph out of everybody? And Politico is praising her as this champion for relatability with the common folk out there. Not, of course, attributing the fact that Katie Porter and every Democrat voted for all this bullshit and all this spending, and they are the cause for all of this.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the getting a harumph out there. I actually used that clip in the post I wrote. It went up while we were talking. But
fine clip, actually.
Oh my gosh, is that not just like the best clip for politics? Because they came back. They came back after spending a week at home, realizing that they're going to need to do something to save their phony baloney jobs. And that's all this was. That's all this frontliners freak thing is.
It's all theater. It's theater. And all of a sudden they're like, well, they're not buying the spin. We've got to at least pretend like we're doing something. They have no intention of caving and putting through legislation on expansion of drilling and energy production. They have no intention of trying to take some of the money out of the economy and reverse some of the spending that they've thrown out there. They're not going to do any of that.
Yeah.
They only know how to affect inflation one way, and it's the wrong way.
Right.
They don't know how to. They don't know how to do deflationary policy in Washington D.C.
No, they don't. And you don't want sharp deflation anyway, because that's almost as bad as sharp inflation.
Well, I mean, you're into recession territory when you start doing that.
Right, but the you have to turn off the increases, right? I mean, it's even if you get back, and this is the point, getting back to our discussion on inflation, even if you get back down to 0% inflation, you're still at the high levels, you're still at the higher level of prices, and wages are still going to take a long time to catch up to it.
Correct.
So yeah, that's
so you've got all that going on, and yet at the same time, what are they focusing on? They're focusing on something that they think is going to be the salvation political issue for them, because all of America, they think, has been reflected in polling on the question, the top line question
about Roe.
Should Roe v. Wade be overturned? And when you phrase the question that way, 2/3 of America probably said, "Nah, I don't want to deal with the hassle of that. So no, I'm not for that." And so Democrats are saying, "See, the country's with us, so we can go full tilt up to the moment of birth, full infanticide, and America's with us on this." Well, no, that's actually not where the country is. So what do the Democrats do? Overreach in some of the most ghastly ways possible.
Yep.
In so doing, turning off the American people. Even the congressional generic ballot, when CNN did this, they showed the Republicans with a 1-point margin on the congressional generic ballot before the Dobbs leak came out a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
After the leak, when you would think conventional wisdom is Democrats are going to get a bounce out of that issue, because of the Democrats' overreach and what they're actually trying to do and how repulsive it is to the American people, the congressional generic ballot in CNN is now GOP +7. It actually went the other way.
Yep. And it's the overall in RCP is GOP plus 3.5, which is, when you realize that anything above a D plus 5 for Republicans is good news, you're into red wave territory.
The 2010 midterms after Obamacare, in which the GOP took 63 House seats, still had a congressional generic ballot of D plus 2.
Yep. That's we are firmly in red wave territory, Duane.
Do we have time for Chief Warren?
Let's go ahead and listen to Chief Warren, as Duane puts it, on the necessity of minding the majority. I love this clip. This is great.
It's pretty fun. Here we go. Here we go. Is it playing?
No, it's fascinating. Look at three dark cows at midnight.
Let me go back to here.
What's that line from The Big Lebowski? Darkness enveloped him like. There you go. Okay.
Do you see her now?
Yes.
Here we go.
I believe in democracy, and I don't believe that the minority should have the ability to block things that the majority want to do. That's not in the Constitution. What we're talking about right now are the individual rights and liberties of half the population of the United States of America. I think that's enough to say it's time to get rid of the filibuster. We need to protect voting rights. We need to protect women's rights. And understand this, Mitch McConnell has made clear, they're coming after everybody. So we need to do this, get it on the board.
Okay, so first of all,
the minority shouldn't block the majority. What was the vote yesterday?
Wasn't it 49-51?
It was 49-51. It was indeed 49-50. A majority of people were against the majority of the Senate were against the bill.
So the majority position actually carried the day in the Senate.
Yes, it actually was the majority that won by defeating a bill that only the minority supported.
And so when it's framed by media and it's framed by Chief Warren as this is why we have to block the filibuster, the filibuster didn't come into play. They even if this was a simple majority vote and we did not have a cloture vote here, it still fails.
Well, I think to be accurate, this was a procedural vote. I think it was a cloture vote that failed.
Right,
but even if they had waived it, right, and it went to a floor vote,
even if this were a simple majority vote and there were no filibuster, there were no cloture vote necessary, and this was a straight up or down vote on her bill, it still fails.
Yep. By the way, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking.
Yes, I have.
Okay. That very first part of Elizabeth Warren's thing, they're talking about democracy, which was, that's hilarious in the context of losing a vote 49-51 anyway. But it reminded me of the girls' report near the end when they're doing the reports in school. We have to have democracy because without democracy, we wouldn't have democracy.
And again, if the Dobbs decision holds, doesn't that result in
a lot more democracy?
Direct democracy in all 50 states?
It results in legislatures, setting American policy on something that the Constitution doesn't speak to, which is the way it should have been 49 years ago.
Right.
It never should have been gotten to this point.
Representative democracy, right?
Right. Representative democracy. And if you need any evidence about how badly Roe has warped the relationship between the three branches of government, all you need to do is look at the pressure campaign that's being aimed at justices' homes, yes. Because people are essentially lobbying justices to choose a policy, which is nothing that should never happen in our constitutional form of government.
And then at the tail end of that clip, Chief Warren says, and if you just look at Mitch McConnell, he's already signaled that he's coming after us on everything. Did not Mitch McConnell say from the Senate floor for about the millionth time that I am not going to blow up the legislative filibuster on the abortion issue or anything else?
Yeah.
So when he means come after, That's only if there's 65 Republicans.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Right. So I don't, and again, when you look at what they're actually trying to accomplish and how they're actually trying to frame the issue, I mean, Robert Francis O'Rourke, I still refuse to call a grown man Beto because Beto in Spanish translates to Irish. Robert Francis O'Rourke tried to make the claim on The View yesterday saying, well, me, what you want me to tell you if I've got limits on abortion of any kind? Well, I just believe in Roe and a woman's right to choose all the way up to the end, which is not what Roe did.
No,
it's not what Casey did.
Yeah, neither of those decisions would have resulted in that.
So through their own incompetence and through their own attempt overreach to placate their base, they've lost the American people on this.
Yep.
The American people aren't
for the moment. Both parties really don't represent the mainstream of American opinion on this. But the nice thing about this is that both parties are eventually going to have to start to try to do it, because the era of performative politics is over on this.
I will make the partisan statement though, in saying that the issue is coming to the Republicans more than it is to the Democrats.
Oh, I agree.
Now, the Republicans and the pro-life movement would be very tactically smart to take the win that's coming to them and take the incrementalism that's coming to them instead of trying to stake out the absolutist article or position. Well, I think it's still good to push for it.
Yeah, I mean, again, this gets back to the hearts and minds thing, and the pro-life movement is oriented to that.
Right. Take the wins you're getting and keep working on hearts and minds of those remaining.
Right. Exactly. We're out of time, but just very quickly, Supreme Court is meeting for the very first time today.
Today, right?
Since the leak, right?
I'm sure that's going to be fun.
This will probably go up after the conference is over. So, I mean, by the time the podcast is actually up, we'll probably already answer to this will probably already be out there. Do you expect a per curiam order today, sort of an ex parte Quirin move to rule on Dobbs and issue the opinions later?
You see, that's Hugh's position that it should happen. And what I think Roberts would probably not want to do that. However, I think Alito and the block of 5 that are solid are going to probably, my guess is Alito wants it out and just be done with it.
Well, I think that once she gets out, all the Ruth sent us crap comes to an end, at least at some point, because the reason why they're out there is they're trying to intimidate the judges into changing their position.
Yep.
So once the decision is out, all that comes to an end. They might still fulminate,
right. but right, the damage is done to them, right?
Right.
So if I'm Alito, I'm talking to the other 4, and I'm saying, and I'm telling them, and I'm telling the chief, look, you may not want to do this, but we're gonna drop the 5. We still are the majority on this court. 5-3-1. If the decision is going to be, you're welcome on board, chief, if you want to come. But we're going to release this and decisions to follow. But this is the order.
Yep. I think it's a smart move. We'll see if it happens.
I think so too. I think so too.
We'll see if it happens.
Amy Coney Barrett, even though there was only 6 Handmaid Tales protesting her house, she's got more people in her own house and her family than protested her. But I digress. I'm sure Amy Coney Barrett's like, release a decision.
Let's get this over with. Yeah, let's rip the Band-Aid off.
Clarence
fully.
Thomas, yeah, let's get it done.
Yeah, let's rip the Band-Aid off fully, and we can release the opinions later, but let's get the decision out there. All right, what's coming up quickly? What's coming up on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show? What's coming up on and tonight's after show?
Tonight's after show, we're going to cover a little bit more of the impact of the inflation number, the PPI number. I guarantee you Democrats will say something. If Joe Biden gives their speech today and goes 3 days in a row, dear Lord, I'm going to have it. All that's going to happen. It's just basically me in the news today on the after show. As far as on the Hewitt Show tomorrow, we will have a conversation with Larry Arnn, which we're actually going to be taping right about now, in just a few minutes. And that's going to be pretty much a decision on, or a discussion on the Dobbs thing and that whole thing from kind of a 30,000 foot level with Dr. Arnn of Hillsdale College. So that's actually going to be a really fascinating conversation. We're going to do a lot about that. Tomorrow, also, we're going to have a conversation with Admiral James Stavridis.
Great stuff.
And we will have a kind of a lefty, righty, center-right law discussion of what we think is going to happen if they do release this decision between Jonathan Adler and Stephen Waldeck, two great law professors. So we'll do that discussion as well tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, that's coming up at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 a.m. in God's time zone, 3 a.m. on the left coast, HughHewitt.com. But you can go to the Universe to watch the show, which is what you should be doing, HughNiverse.com. And Duane and Samuel Patterson, we'll talk again next week, sir.
We will indeed. Thanks, guys.
All right. Stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up next. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. I am really happy to reintroduce one of my really good friends, King Banaian of St. Cloud State University and the economics department there. He's also a broadcaster in the Twin Cities for the Salem affiliate there. The businessman is, and I always forget, it's KYCR, but I always forget the frequency. What's the frequency, Kenneth?
AM 1440, KYCR, Twin Cities Business Radio. You find us at TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com.
TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com, and that's every Saturday, by the way. And I've been a guest on his show. It's a lot of fun. You should be listening to it, or if you're really lucky, you can be a guest on it. But maybe I'm the only person who can be lucky in that regard, King.
Well, I've had other guests. Actually, we're having a guest on Saturday. One of Nathan Lewis, who's a co-author of a book with Steve Forbes on inflation, will be on the show Saturday. So that's that. I'm looking forward to that conversation, and maybe that's a nice segue to what we want to talk about.
I was just going to say, it's like you're a radio guy. You know how to do the segue, man. This is amazing. Of course, King was my partner in radio for several years in the Twin Cities when I was part of the Northern Alliance Radio Network. He's still there. That's part of what the gig is for KYCR 1440, TwinCitiesBusiness.com. And King is here to talk about the latest and definitely not the greatest Consumer Price Index inflation report and the complete incoherence of Joe Biden's economic policies. I mean, they must have known that it wasn't going to be good, because they were out front last couple of days at the White House trotting out the GOP hasn't solved inflation talking point, that it's Vladimir Putin's talking point all over again. Everything but, I mean, even the White House had to clarify later after Joe Biden's remarks, King, that yes, the president recognizes that he's actually the president and that Democrats are actually in charge of Congress. That's how bad that the blame throwing is getting over at the White House.
I mean, it turns out it wasn't just Republicans that were at fault, even though they controlled neither chamber of Congress nor the White House, but it was the super de-duper MAGA Republicans. I think that's what he called them. I mean, yeah, I watched this. I didn't watch the speech, but I read the transcript, and it's kind of shocking what was in that. We could talk about that, or you want to talk about
let's talk
about the numbers this morning.
Let's talk about the numbers this morning. The CPI came in at year-on-year 8.3% increase in consumer prices, month-on-month 0.3, but in a sort of an interesting reversal, core inflation, which is the inflation minus food and energy, actually went up 0.6% month-on-month, double the rate from last month, because there was an artificially induced dip in gasoline prices in April. And this, I think, and of course we've already seen the gas prices blow past the record now in May, so that's no longer going to be holding here. But you had I was actually surprised at how little there was of this, but there were a few media outlets that were saying, "Oh, inflation has lessened." Going from 8.5 to 8.3 without apparently anybody realizing that A, it hasn't actually lessened. The rate of increase might have slowed incrementally, but it's still going up. And B, what the basis comparison does to this.
Right. So I think, the headline number went to 8.3 from 8.5. And normally in past months, when we said don't pay attention to the headline number, when we wanted to look at core wasn't going up. And I felt like saying, so would this be transitory deflation if we went from 8.5 to 8.3? I suspect that's probably not going to be what they use. But Ed, one of the things that I like to look at, there is a couple of publications from the Cleveland Federal Reserve, which does a couple of measurements called median CPI, which just says if I take all of the price increases for all of the goods in CPI, right? And there's actually a great piece in the Wednesday morning Wall Street Journal about how you actually go out and measure, and people actually writing down the prices and making sure they're measuring exactly the right thing. So there's an example in there about measuring the price of a can of chicken noodle soup in there. And it was really a good story. If you take all those prices and you take all that information they have in and you take the median, which we teach our students, right? That's the one that's smack dab in the middle.
Right.
That rate, median CPI, went from 4.9% in March to 5.2% in April. Okay. Now, This might be breaking news, particularly if you get your news from traditional media, because chances are no one's going to report median CPI on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow, even though I think they have very good economic writers.
They actually did a good job today. They actually
do a really good job. I like the New York Times reporters, generally speaking, but my guess is that one's not going to make it into the front page. I fished around for some other things. Look, in some sense, what happened was really we painted the tape this morning with a substantial drop in the price of motor fuel, a substantial drop, therefore, in the price of transportation services, in a month. Okay, those two items took about 0.5% by my rough calculation, took 0.5% off the year-over-year number. You had a spike up in airline fares, and I think this is the bigger story yet. The bigger story is really people are traveling, people are consuming services, and as they consume those services, you're seeing these prices begin to go up in those areas. I mean, that spike in airline fares, you might think it's gas and oil, but look, if prices were going up and people weren't traveling, those airline fares would not be increasing. You'd either be canceling those flights or you would just hold the price, and you would hold the price steady. It's going up because people want to get on planes again. People are traveling. You got 2 years of pent-up vacations.
Right.
People could get on the plane and you know what? I'm a good free market fundamentalist. I have no problem with an airline saying, shoot, I could get an extra 10% for that seat. I'm gonna take advantage of that. I don't have a problem with that. I know President Biden did. That's one of his reasons. That's one of the things he said is, what was the problem was we're gouging people. We're charging too much. It's like, you know what? When demand goes up, which you help through your policies, President Biden.
Yep.
When demand goes up, guess what? We teach you in that first economics course. That typically means that prices rise. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of, I want to get to this when we get to Biden's press conference, but the idea that somehow the reason why gas prices are going up is because Republicans haven't come up with a good energy policy is sort of laughable, because what actually happened was that Biden restricted the ability to produce supply while demand was going up. And so the obvious thing that happens, again, Econ 101, you've restricted supply, demand is still going up. What happens to price? Well, it goes up, and it goes up a lot if you do a lot of restrictions, which is exactly where we're at. But back to these numbers. I mean, the one thing that I want to talk a little bit about that I don't think gets enough attention, I did write about it today, is the year-on-year numbers, what the basis for those year-on-year numbers are. Now, if you have a small spate of inflation, like over a few months, which is what this was supposed to be when it started, right? Transitory and all that. You don't run into this. The year-on-year numbers are actually fairly reliable. But we're actually going into now a period in which inflation was rising a year ago past the Fed's, danger level of 2% a year. I think it was just over 4%, like 4.1, 4.2% in April of last year. And the year-on-year number now that we saw today for April 2022 is 8.3% over that 4.2%.
Right.
So we're now entering an area now where those numbers are actually underestimating what the impact of inflation is. The year-on-year number is actually somewhat underestimating it because it's not accounting for the fact that it's based on inflation, on high inflation numbers. And that, to me, I think, is something that hardly anybody's talking about, is that basis comparison issue.
Well, I think the way to get at that problem is to think about what it means in terms of what's happening with your wages, right? So if I compare what I was getting paid for work to what I can buy with it, certainly a year ago it was pretty clear that many workers, particularly at the lower wage levels, were receiving substantial increases in wages. At that time, even when inflation was running back then, it was running at about 4%. Now that we're at the double that number, wages haven't gone up by that much. And you would have to say that over the last year, except for those at the very bottom levels of the income distribution, you've seen a decline in the ability of your wage to buy the bundle of goods and services that you're used to buying.
Yeah.
You actually are short of the money that you would have thought you'd have. That's a significant problem. In terms of how I think the administration wants to talk about inflation. I mean, when you see them write about the fact that, when I read what they're writing, I mean, this is the point where I thought perhaps the Federal Reserve would have acted sooner. And certainly the Fed's going to get bashed even by the Biden White House. I think over time. It's kind of interesting. They probably have the worst possible spokesperson to bash the Fed in Janet Yellen, since she's the previous chair. Right. And you would have to, and she's been I would say if she could have chosen her own successor, she would have chosen Jay Powell. Anyway, so I think that your point about this is layering on top of increases before. I mean, team transitory, I thought had been put away 6 months ago, but they seem to have revived it with the Ukraine war, and potentially, and I think probably with some justification, what's happening in China with shutdowns of the shipping facilities in the southeast of the country. I think they're seeing, and I actually would say they probably are experiencing some additional supply side inflation, but a lot of this was certainly helped by their own policies of both the Fed in terms of being slow to raise rates and end quantitative easing, and by the federal government, Congress, passing a bill in March of 2021, and then passing another bill, the Basic Infrastructure Bill, which might have a lot of good things on it, but spends a lot of money really fast, and actually is also contributing to inflation. And let's just imagine what would have happened if Joe Manchin hadn't been standing athwart the Democratic Party saying stop from an additional $6 trillion of spending.
Right. And again, this gets back to the Thomas. We talked about the Thomas Honig piece that Politico ran. I think it was in February or March of this year. Mm-hmm. And that's, that is, I think, well worth reading continually when you're looking at these numbers, because he is the one who has really laid out that the inflation that we're experiencing now is the result of Federal Reserve policies that go all the way back to 2010, really 2009, that he was opposed to on the basis of this particular result. And he was warning that the monetary expansions called the quantitative easings were going to create asset bubbles. They were going to create bubbles in the economy. It was going to eventually lead to inflation if you had, if you had a catalyst for it, if somebody struck a match to the tinder. And Larry Summers, of course, in February, very famously warned that the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden was pushing in February of last year, I should say, was exactly the match, and the previous COVID relief bills were the tinder, and they ran the risk of overheating the economy, spiking demand at a point where supply wasn't in place, and touching off a massive inflationary cycle, which the White House then, of course, scoffed at, and here we are. It's not just Biden, right? My point is, it's not just Biden. This is really a monetary expansion issue that's been going on for a dozen years. However, I think it's good to revisit why the Fed felt compelled to do that. And the reason why the Fed felt compelled to do that was because the policies pursued by the Obama administration in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008 were no growth policies, right? An expansion of regulation, an expansion of taxes, an expansion of subsidies to targeted industries and targeted recipients, and sort of a more of a shift to central economic control. And when the recovery wasn't going well, the Federal Reserve, I think, really, and maybe you can correct me on this, Ben Bernanke, really felt pushed into using monetary policy to fix what was wrong with the economy, because the policies that were coming out of the Obama administration simply were counterproductive to that. And those policies were pursued until Donald Trump came in office, reversed them, and we saw actual organic growth.
Yeah, I think what you saw, so few things that you have in there. First of all, the Tom Honig piece in February in Politico is wonderful. Let me also, if you want to get the fuller version of that, Christopher Leonard's article, the book, I should say, The Lords of Easy Money, is fabulous, and it focuses on Honig's career, and then interweaves that into that whole whole piece. The Fed actually did 3 rounds of quantitative easing. And at some point, Bernanke decides maybe it's time to start pulling this back, tries to in the moment, and ends up having, of course, we remember the taper tantrum that was had there. I think one thing that we forget in that process is they actually didn't do quantitative easing for a long time in the United States. But while we were not quantitative easing, when we weren't, Europe was going through almost like a double dip of the recession from 2008, 2009, and they did a whole lot of quantitative easing. Mario Draghi, the head of the ECB at the time, saying we're going to do whatever it takes to bring this economy back, and whatever it took was trillions of euros in additional financing. So that when we got to, but the problem here is that what got us there was the fact that, and this is what Honig points out, we did so much quantitative easing, we built a much more fragile financial system, one that was actually functionally dependent on easy money from the Fed to an extent the Fed didn't even understand. Right. Really. There's an episode, I don't want to go, this is a bit of a rabbit hole for what you want to talk about, so I won't go too far into it, but there was an episode in September of 2019. This is an important date because it's just a few months before we get to 2020, and so it's fresh in the Fed's mind. But there was an episode where all of a sudden the money market really shook, and I think this is in both that Politico piece and in Leonard's book, talking about the fact that all of a sudden short-term money market rates spiked. Nobody understood why, except they thought, oh my gosh, we thought we had a lot of extra money in the system, but the market's acting like they don't have enough reserves to do their daily business. So they crushed a bunch of money into the system then. And that's why when March 2020 happens, and the market begins to get shaky again, it's basically they just find their decision was basically, we will buy any asset anybody puts in front of us, and we will print money to pay for it. That world was there, and it's in that same few week period between March 15th and April 15th that we get the first CARES Act
Right.
from Congress, and that's all of that kindling. And it's not kindling is probably not the right word for it. We threw a downpour of gasoline onto a smoldering fire. And, the other thing I'd say before, and this will be my last point, is, I give a lot of credit to Larry Summers for saying that. But, the Biden administration tried to sideline Larry Summers and say, hey, this is just this one guy. He's not really saying anything. The person that got me believing, there's some real dissension going on even amongst the policy leaders here, was when Jason Furman, I want to say like May or June of 2021, on a CNBC panel that they do when they do the jobs report on that first Friday of the month, basically said, Larry's right. We've got a real problem here. We're spending too much, because this was the point where they were talking about the bipartisan infrastructure plan, and they were talking about the I don't know what's the word we use for the
Build Back Better. Build Back
Better.
Yeah.
Right. When they were doing both of those things, it was Furman, of all people, a Biden CEA chair, who says that's too much. You really are playing with fire now. Well, it turns out the fire had already been started.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Biden administration's policies. I mean, we can talk about these idiotic press conferences this week, saying nothing, right? Blaming Republicans because Republicans won't approve even more spending, when spending is really the issue here. And do you see any evidence at all that the Biden administration is actually thinking about substantive policy to respond to to this inflation? Because inflation is going to just erode their political standing even further than it already has. The longer it continues, the worse it gets for them. But I don't see anything of that sort. I still see the same excuses and the same gimmicks, like Strategic Petroleum Reserve releases, which gave them 2 weeks worth of relief at the gas pumps, and it's back over the record now again.
Yeah, no, there's nothing in there. I mean, in the press release that came with the Biden press conference, and I'm just going to set aside the press conference. I didn't watch it. I read it. I didn't watch it, so I don't have. It sounds like it was bad, but I have nothing to offer on that. But I will say what they put out was, the release of the money. Release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which frankly all that really does is mean we're going to push up the price later because you got to refill the reserve.
Right.
And it kills off some of the incentive for oil producers and oil exploration companies to go drill more. Right? You don't have to drill more now because we're gonna tap this reserve instead. So you've kicked that off yet another 6 months. And they say, well, exploration won't put anything online now. Look, prices in the future influence prices in the present, right? What I expect, when someone asks me why did the price go up or price go down at the pump here in St. Cloud, what I tell them is, don't ask me how much it costs for the oil they produced, or the gas that's in the tank right now. You're trying to forecast what's going to cost for me to replace the gas when the tank is empty, right? And frankly, what's happening is next winter our prices will be higher because unless Congress passes a bill and the president signs it, they've got to refill the SPR. So he says that he says, look, you should pass my clean energy plan and so forth. And he wants people to switch to electric cars. Let's increase our the CAFE standards, the car average fuel efficiency standards.
Right.
He wants those picked up too. he's doing a lot of things that are actually not just not solving the problem, but in fact, I think making things worse. By subsidizing demand, you're making things worse. So when you say, oh, prescription bills are too high, so we're going to give you some extra money to pay those prescription bills, you've just made things worse, not better.
Right.
Right.
Well, this gets back to the Obama administration. They're the same things, right?
Right.
It's the exact same policy response. And the only difference is that the Fed no longer has the elasticity to cover for it with monetary policy. In fact, they're going to have to go the opposite direction because now we've kicked off this massive inflation, and they're back to the same position. They're just on the other side of that position that they were in 2009, which is that they're looking at an administration whose economic policy is either incoherent or counterproductive, and monetary policy is the only game in town. Unfortunately, inflation is the highest priority now. So you're going to see a bunch of interest rate hikes. They're certainly not done with this. They're probably going to have to do a Volcker-like, at least at some point it will amount to a Volcker-like intervention here that's going to force a recession, because it's the only way I think that they're going to be able to quell the inflation that's going on right now. And that's going to be even bigger disaster for us, for overall. I mean, I don't like recessions, but also for, Democrats and the Biden administration. It's going to be an utter disaster for them.
Yeah. And I've been listening. I spent about a half hour this morning going through all the speeches that Federal Reserve governors and presidents have been giving over the last week since the meeting last week and that 50 basis point rise. And to a person, they're saying there's more 50 basis point increases coming. And when they're asked, where do you think this is going to stop? Most of them believe that they're actually going to have to take the rate above 3%. And here's what's interesting, Ed. If you take a look what's happening in the market right now, the reason the markets are going down is because I think the markets got caught a little flat-footed, particularly after Jay Powell, who, by the way, still hasn't been confirmed as chair of the Fed,
right?
Which is, I think, I find fascinating. They took care of the Lisa Cook nomination yesterday, but they still haven't. They're sort of letting Jay twist a little in the wind right now, but they're all. Jay Powell says, no, I'm not going to do a 75 basis point increase. And it's the one question that you can just tell these presidents and governors don't want to answer. When they're asked this question, they're like, well, it's going to depend on the data. It's going to depend on the data. It's going to depend on the data, which is their way of saying, I don't know, maybe, maybe not.
We're going to keep our options open, is what they're saying.
Keep our options open, right?
Yep.
And meanwhile, they've got to look at the White House and realize they're the only game in town. When the president is out saying that his cure for inflation is to tell corporations not to charge too much and ask the wealthy to pay their fair share, okay, when that's what he hears as the only initiatives that they're going, other than, oh, that crazy Rick Scott, he's got a crazy idea to raise taxes. Guess what? Raising taxes would probably actually help reduce inflation. Okay, no one wants to say that because it's bad in an election season, but it would actually help. But the only offer that you're getting from these folks is getting from the White House is to lower price pressure by jawboning down prices. And honestly, and you and I were chatting on Twitter yesterday, and I think I put up a picture of the old whip inflation now buttons from Gerald Ford. That felt like a win speech to me. That felt like the Ford speech from 1975.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
And my thought is, that one didn't turn out well for President Ford. I don't think this is going to turn out well for President Biden either. I
don't either. King, we're going to let it go on that note. Whip inflation now. The fabulous return 47 years later of whip inflation now. I am ordering my WIN button as we speak, but only ironically. And King, one more time, where can people find you and where can people find your show?
Well, I am available through the School of Public Affairs here at St. Cloud State. I've worked at St. Cloud State since 1984. You can find us at stcloudstate.edu/SOPA for School of Public Affairs. I'm available also on Twitter at Prof. Banaian for my academic stuff. For my radio show stuff, it's at Banaian Show, and you can hear the King Banaian Show Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. Central Time at TwinCitiesBusinessRadio.com.
King Banaian, thanks so much for being with us. Great stuff. We're going to keep coming back to you on this inflation stuff all year long. I can tell you that right now. Stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up right after this. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. It is time to heed the Constitution, Justice Samuel Alito wrote in his purloined Dobbs draft, and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Justices only have to look outside their doors to find evidence of Alito's conclusion that Roe warped the constitutional form of self-governance and his wisdom in warning of the consequences of rule by judicial fiat. President Biden, his press secretary Jen Psaki, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, among others, have either encouraged or refused to discourage angry demonstrations outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. These protests actually violate federal law, as Congress recognized at one time that political lobbying has no place in judicial proceedings, especially when used to intimidate jurists. Biden and Schumer want to force the judiciary into the role of a super legislature. Justice Alito wants to return it to its proper constitutional role. The mob sent by Democrats to intimidate the justices proved the critical need for Alito to prevail. I'm Ed Morrissey. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. I am speaking to one of my really good friends in the biz, Christian Toto of HollywoodandToto.com. He's on Twitter at HollywoodandToto. He's got a great conservative take on the entertainment industry, but also just smart takes on all sorts of different issues, especially box office. And we're coming up to the, I don't know what it's like for you in Colorado, Christian, but here in Texas, we're already getting summer heat. So I'm starting to wonder what the summer blockbuster season's going to look like here.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of it right here. Denver's kind of up and down with this time of year, but yeah, it's looking and feeling a bit normal for box office, which I was a little skeptical about. I mean, you know, Doctor Strange, the sequel, did very, very well. The Batman has done extremely well. We've seen some mid-sized films which have kind of threatened to flirt with the 100 million mark. That's a good sign as well. So, you know, I don't think we're all the way back. I worry about the more adult-minded films, the Oscar bait movies, and how they'll survive. But there is a partial comeback here, so that's good to report.
It is, and you and I have talked a lot about this over the last 2 years, and I was sort of predicting that the pandemic and the lockdowns were going to be the death knell of the cinema, because, and we had discussed it even prior to that the home theater experience is so good now that I thought that it would be tough for cinemas to compete, and apparently sort of like Mark Twain, you know, the reports of the cinema's demise turn out to be somewhat exaggerated.
Yeah, and one interesting note is that, you know, Netflix was going to help lead the way out of the theatrical jungle by having all these new movies, these big movie stars. And I think they'll continue to do so, but they've been hammered by very bad financial news in the last few weeks. So I don't know if they're going to be able to keep throwing money at these big stars like they did back in the day. So that's an interesting wrinkle as well. If some of these streamers can't stand up and kind of give people the alternative, then it does help out the theaters and makes them better able to compete.
Well, I also think that they're going to be helped out now when the things are really starting to reopen and the mask mandates are starting to fall. It helps that it's the summer, right? And the summer is, first off, in most places, warm weather, it usually means lower viral transmission. So that's one thing. But also B, you're looking at a slate of movies in any season, in any year, right? That is really going to appeal to younger viewers and really are sort of the must-see on big screen events. And Doctor Strange, of course, is the first of these. So, you know, Doctor Strange, I think it's just been released, right?
Yeah, just a few days ago.
So I think that will help prepare or maybe plow the road here for cinemas to return to some version of normality. And to be honest with you, I'm looking for something that I can go see in the theaters just so I can experience that again. My wife isn't as enthusiastic, but you know, I'm living in a new area. I'd like to go see there's a local theater here, local cinema. I'd like to check that out and see what it's like. I'm just looking for the right I'm just looking for the right movie to do that with, but I don't think Doctor Strange is going to be it because I'm not really much of a Marvel Universe guy.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I always kind of had mixed feelings about it. It's not the strongest effort. It's a lot of CGI, a lot of razzle dazzle with a not as great a story to back it up. So your best bet may be coming out later this month, which is Top Gun Maverick, which has been delayed and delayed and redelayed and super delayed because of the pandemic. We'll see. You know, I actually am very curious how well it does because, you know, for people in our age bracket, mature, wise, sophisticated, you know, we lived through the first film and we kind of loved it for all its gooiness. And, you know, is that going to, you know, carry forth? I mean, are today's kids clamoring to see more Tom Cruise and Top Gun? I'm not convinced. We shall see, but it should be spectacle movie making, big aerial sequences. It's the kind of movie that I think you're talking about going back to the theater. So we shall see.
You know, it's interesting because I wasn't a huge fan of the first movie.
Nor am I.
I mean, I just wasn't. It's interesting. And I got to tell you, I mean, this is funny because I was 22, right? It was 1985, right? Or was it 1986?
86, I'm
86.
sure.
So I was 23 years old, right, when it came out. That's how long ago that this has been, right? And I'll tell you what really kind of triggered it for me. First off was just sort of the cliche. It's filled with cliches. I mean, this is a movie that Top Gun, the original Top Gun, is just filled with cliches. But what really got it for me was that whole sex scene with Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis and the backlit tongues and stuff like that. I mean, it's not even that I'm a prude, right? I mean, I've seen movies that have more than that, but I just thought it was it's really sort of a bizarre thing to focus in on. I mean, I guess maybe I was in 1986. Maybe I was a proto-prude. I have no idea, but I just it turned me off, and the whole predictable, you know, everything was predictable in that movie. So it was okay, and I've watched it since, and it's still okay. I like some of the actors in it. Val Kilmer, I think, was one of the better actors in it. But overall, I sort of liked Hot Shots. Was it Hot Shots Part 2? No, it was the first Hot Shots. I actually liked Hot Shots better than I liked Top Gun.
Because it was actually on purpose. They were actually trying to make us laugh as opposed
right.
to all the cliches. Yeah, it's not my movie either, even though it's of my generation. But, you know, Tom Cruise was big movie star back then. You had Danger Zone and you had Take My Breath Away, great songs. So it was kind of this confluence, you know, Reagan's America, you name it, it was in there. You know, Pretty People, it's hard to fight that. And, you know, Cruise was really at his sort of cocksure best at that point. You could do no wrong, good looking guy, you know, all the attitude, all the gravitas that he had, and he could act as well. So, you know, it kind of hit the right spot, and that's really hard to replicate. And, you know, I wrote a piece on my site recently about that was such a patriotic, rah, go America movie. You can't make that anymore, that's for sure. So, you know, this is going to be a different beast. I'm actually seeing it this week. It comes out later this month, though.
You know, it's interesting, and I read your piece at HollywoodandToto.com, and everybody should go read his piece at HollywoodandToto.com, that and many others. He's got other contributors there to do a fine job of doing reviews and covering some of the issues. And I agree with you. I don't think you can make that kind of a patriotic film anymore, and it's certainly not a Reagan's America sort of thing. And even Tom Cruise, as you point out, was saying that he didn't want to do a sequel or any sequels because he felt that this was it would be basically sort of doing this sort of jingoistic thing over and over again, sort of like the Iron Eagle series, which was
unabashedly, sure.
So I mean, I get that. I also think Tom Cruise is underrated as an actor. I think people make the mistake of confusing his personal life with his professional talent. He's a very talented guy, and is he a niche actor to a certain extent? Yeah, but he can do comedy, he can do drama. He's proven it. And, you know, he happens to do a lot of action films, and he's really good at it. And I mean, I'd watch it. I think that one might want to wait until it comes onto the home screen television, though, just because I think that we're going to get my guess is we're going to get sort of a politically correct, watered down, you know, sort of woke. I'm assuming it's going to be somewhat woke just because of who's making this stuff.
You know, interesting. A couple of thoughts there. I think you're 100% right about Tom Cruise. He's a very good actor. I also think he's a genuine movie star, which is sort of you can't really pin it down what it is, but you know it when you see it.
Yep.
Also, he doesn't make a lot of bad movies. I thought his Mummy film was terrible, but I think he's one of these guys who's very in charge, very hands-on, very involved with his films. And I think he's got a pretty good sense, a little bit like Clint Eastwood, of what people want and not giving us garbage. So having said all that, I agree. The film can't be the Reagan era movie, but I also think that his recent films really aren't too woke. I mean, there may be moments here or there with the new movie, but I think he'd be the guy on set who has all the power to say, hey, maybe this isn't the direction. Maybe we'll kind of cut that out of the script. I could be wrong. We'll find out soon, but I don't think he's your go-to woke guy. I think his sensibilities are kind of sharper than that.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about woke. We're going to talk about Brian Cox, and this is another piece that you wrote over at HollywoodandToto.com. But before we get off of that, let's talk about what else is coming out at the box office over the next few weeks. Doctor Strange, obviously, the big tent pole. And, of course, Top Gun Maverick, which has been anticipated for years. But what else is coming out? What should we be looking forward to?
There's a new movie called Men. It's sort of a folky horror movie. It comes out in a few weeks. His director is Alex Garland, who's done some interesting work. I think he was the director of Deus Ex Machina. I always get the name wrong. It's a science fiction film about a guy who creates a robot. It's a fascinating, under the radar science fiction film. It's excellent if you haven't seen it. I think he also did Annihilation with Natalie Portman. He's a pretty talented fellow, so I'm intrigued by that. There's a new Gru Minions movie. The title escapes me, and I'm so burnt out on that entire property. The Minions were cute the first time, and that's it. I just can't believe people keep seeing those particular films, but it's for the kiddies. That comes out in a few weeks. And I guess the next biggie is going to be Thor, God, Love and Thunder, which is going to have a female Thor. It's going to have Christian Bale as supposedly a great villain. We shall see. That's the buzz. And, Chris Hemsworth is back. This is Taika Waititi, who's the really talented director. He did Ragnarok. He's done some other good films. He did a movie I love, Jojo Rabbit. So he really does kind of lean into the humor of the Marvel movies. I think that's going to be massive. Other than that, though, I don't think there's a ton that I'm clamoring to see. It's a little bit of a weaker lineup, I think. But we'll see. Maybe people will be so hungry for movie theaters again that it'll kind of override that kind of thing where people just say, hey, I just want to go back.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think it's a bit of a fool's errand to look for, adult fare. I mean, when I say adult, I mean just aimed at adults, right? I'm not talking about, there's another context of adult fare that is perennial. And if you're interested in that, you guys know where to find it. You don't need to be talking to Christian or I about that. We probably don't know anyway. But it's, talking about, mature. Well, I guess that word gets used an awful lot too. You know what I'm talking about. Things that aren't aimed at teenagers, things that aren't comic book movies. Yeah. This is a summer. I mean, they want to get the kids in the theaters, and that's how they make. That's sort of like their Christmas season, so to speak. It's where they make their big money, so that they can do some of the arty stuff and some of the more dramatic stuff later on. So. I guess, Christian, what I'm saying is I'm gradually coming to the realization that I'm becoming a curmudgeon, and I'm about 2 steps away from yelling at kids to stay off my damn lawn. But yeah, I mean, I think that we'll see other smaller films make appearances. They're just not going to get they're not going to get a ton of press at the moment.
Yeah, and once in a while you do get a kind of a summer sleeper that comes around that kind of is really strong counter programming. I need to double check the lineup. Nothing jumped out at me when I was looking at sort of the summer preview, but it does happen from time to time, and you do need sort of a counterbalance to the blockbuster, the popcorn mentality. And I still enjoy it, but I do like that sort of kind of change, kind of palate cleanser content. But really, that's September, October, November. That's what those months are for, the more serious films. So that to each his own season, or her own season. I don't want to judge the the gender of the seasons.
There is one that's coming out apparently in next month that you and I actually kind of discussed briefly on Twitter, which is Baz Luhrmann's Elvis movie. Apparently is coming next month.
Yeah, that one. I have to say. Does today's generation care about Elvis? I don't think so. I mean, he's been such a presence in our lives for decades. but I feel like it hasn't been that way for about 10 years. Again, I could be wrong. Maybe it's time to introduce a new generation to who he was and why he was special. I think that's a tough sell. I really do. And selfishly, in a very subjective way, I look at the actor, a fairly unknown name. I don't get it. I don't get him as Elvis. I mean, Elvis is so distinct, it's hard to really capture him. So I think this has got a lot of roadblocks against it, and probably a pretty big budget too.
Austin Butler is the one playing Elvis.
Thank you.
Tom, well, I'm looking at it. I had to look it up.
That's okay.
I mean, Tom Hanks is playing Colonel Tom Parker.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, it almost sounds like he's going to reprise his role from That Thing You Do as Mr. White. Which I was just watching the other day. It's a fun film. I mean,
it's a super lighthearted, good pop music. Put your mind at rest. It's that kind of movie, and that's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. But here was my issue with this. Not the idea of having an Elvis movie, because I remember when Kurt Russell played Elvis in a TV movie. It was very well received. Did a great job, by the way, in that. There have been a couple other, Forrest Gump briefly depicts an Elvis character. I think you see him in some other, biopics like Walk the Line. I think there's a passing depiction of Elvis in one of the road scenes and stuff like that. Almost like, I mean, I don't mean this in any sort of irreverent way, but it's almost the way that Hollywood would depict Jesus Christ up until about the time of The Greatest Story Ever Told. It was always, you never actually get Jesus to talk, but he's over there on the on the hilltop. And but the reason why I was curious about Baz Luhrmann is because Baz Luhrmann is just such wretched excess. I mean, Moulin Rouge, just nothing but a deluge of this sort of, visual and auditory stimuli. It's frenetic. He sped the film up so that they all look like they're sort of spasmodic when they're dancing at times. The Great Gatsby you had, which I actually liked. I liked it better than I liked Moulin Rouge. I actually thought that it was an interesting production. But I think it really undermined one of the themes that I get from Gatsby, which is that about the wretched excess of the era, right? And how empty it is. And you've got Baz Luhrmann giving you wretched excess, pretty much all the way through the film, primarily in the first half, but really, just over the top stuff most of the way through it. Elvis, if he's only doing the Vegas era of Elvis, maybe that works. But I mean, Elvis is about raw rock and roll. It's about, coming out of, Tennessee and launching himself, Mississippi and Tennessee, and launching himself I would expect a more gritty approach to at least a good portion of Elvis's life. And Baz Luhrmann doesn't exactly. He and Luc Besson, neither one of them, screams gritty to me.
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing I worried about the film is that, listen, there's something to be said about the fact that he was the white face of sort of R&B in a sense, and there were certainly cultural implications there. And I think if you kind of touch on that in a forthright way, it's perfectly fine. They could go heavily into it and make it woke, which would be annoying. Maybe this is an unfair comparison, but I compare Elvis a little bit to Marilyn Monroe. Like, I feel like she's been so often explored in cinema, different movies, different takes, different actresses. And I'm just like, I'm Marilyn Monroe out. There's a new project they're working on with her. I think Ana de Armas is playing her, and she's a talented actress. She's beautiful. I'm sure she'll be fine. I don't care. And I feel a little bit like Elvis. Like, I've spent all these years exploring this, and Hollywood has been teaching me about her and the mystique and the magic and the allure and the tragedy. What else you got? So I think the Elvis thing is going to be like, what else you got? There's certainly it's so explored territory. You got to take something new from it.
Well, I think your point is really well taken with Marilyn Monroe. There was actually, I think Michelle Williams did a good job.
Yeah, My Week with Marilyn.
Yeah. I thought that was, although the storyline apparently was not exactly true to life. I mean,
Oops.
it was based on a real thing, but the guy who is the protagonist, who's played by Eddie Redmayne, if I remember correctly,
Yes, I believe so.
is actually a lot more of a cad than a protagonist in real life. When this all was happening, he was a lot more of a cad than a protagonist, and he was a user, and he used Marilyn, he used his old girlfriend, and etc. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff with this. It was prettied up for that. But Michelle Williams was really good in the role.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you see the new Marilyn Monroe documentary that Netflix is airing?
I didn't know. Is it worth exploring?
You know, it is. I will tell you what my issue with it is. First off, there's a lot of good information in there that, unless you're really immersed in the whole Marilyn Monroe thing, you're probably going to learn some new things about Marilyn Monroe, about what happened, the sequence of events that led to her death. It never makes an argument that her death was anything other than suicide, either accidental or on purpose. It's not that type of thing, but there's a lot about the Kennedys, and there's a lot of people who this reporter who put this together has tons of tapes of interviews that he was doing at the time and for several years afterwards. So there's a lot of interesting information. The only thing that really bothers me about that is they're reenacting the interviews rather than just doing, like the Ken Burns thing, take pictures, zoom in, zoom out, show some action. And to me, that introduces a note of falseness that really, I think, undermines the probity of what they're trying to get across here. Other than that, though, I think it's really interesting, worthwhile if you're still interested in Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, and I also wonder at the end of the day, that's not our era. We didn't grow up watching her on the big screen. And I'm thinking she was obviously beautiful. She had a comic ability, and her life was tragedy. No, full stop. But I also wonder if we've kind of built her up as this sort of icon in a way that maybe it's not richly deserved. I don't know.
It's a good question.
I
thought the same thing in this. And I think what you find in this is this was a woman who was struggling mightily with her own inner demons of insecurity and feeling of being rejected. And it really interfered with her ability to broaden herself. Although she did improve in terms of acting. She worked on it. But also her ability to really derive any real pleasure from it. And I think that's the thing that really comes across in it. So worthwhile if you're interested.
And maybe for some people who also struggle with similar issues, that they could latch onto her as and identify with that part of her persona. I don't know. When you live through a phenomena, you get it. I was born in '68, so I didn't get the Beatles. I kind of get it from an intellectual point of view. So maybe if you live through that era, it's a different situation entirely. I remember when Elvis died, and my mom and dad were in the room, and the shock on their faces, because I didn't know Elvis. I was just a little kid at the time, but for them it was just a gut punch.
Well, it was a gut punch from my parents and my godmother, who I happened to be staying with at the time. You were on vacation. I was staying with my godmother at the time when the news came across, and she was devastated by this. Elvis was always her big, celebrity crush, so to speak, and she just adored him. And I liked Elvis's music, but I didn't get that much. That didn't get to me as much. Yeah. So that's coming up. That'll be Baz Luhrmann's Elvis will be coming up in June. Let's turn to at least the Brian Cox story that Hollywood and Toto has been covering. This is Brian Cox pushing back against Hollywood's cancel culture, who actually, and I love Brian Cox anyway in films, even in bad films. Brian Cox is always fun to watch.
He's great.
And it depends on what your definition of bad is, but Super Troopers, I just love Super Troopers. And he's absolutely hilarious in that movie. But he actually pins the tail on the donkey, and I don't mean this politically, just as a turn of phrase,
sure,
by calling it modern day McCarthyism, which I have said for a very long time. That's exactly what this is.
It's exactly what it is, and I think it's interesting. I think he was speaking to Piers Morgan about this. So, but I think what's interesting is that often people, when they're cornered, will get into this territory, or if they're under attack, will get into this territory. And if you're talking to Piers Morgan, it's one of the things that he cares about. But Brian Cox is not in the crosshairs, and the fact that he really lambaste this movement and does it without reservation was very fascinating to me. And I think he just sees a lot of his fellow actors who are coming under attack, who are being questioned for their behavior on set, for things they've said a dozen years ago. And he's had enough, and good for him. I think he might be in his early 70s. Maybe he's just at that age where he doesn't give a bleep, who knows? But what he said was authentic. It was right. And we need more people to say things like that, because it does matter. People should be forgiven. And what's going on is not right. And I mentioned in my article about, Frank Langella is under attack, and Bill Murray. And they may have behaved badly enough to lose their gigs. Or maybe someone is misinterpreting what they did, or maybe someone is trying to be the victim in the situation and bringing down a person of immense power. I don't trust the system anymore. I don't trust this Hollywood to get it right or wrong.
It's interesting you bring up Bill Murray, because I love Bill Murray. Bill Murray on screen is just awesome, and he's done so many great things. Yeah, and he's also willing to poke fun at himself. I mean, if you watched either of the two Zombieland movies, more in the first one than the second one, but he does have this sort of cameo appearance at the end as sort of a prologue to the whole story arc, which is really hilarious. I mean, it's hard not to like a guy who just shows up and does, who just, photobombs people and gives them a little bit of enjoyment with his, by sharing his presence. But he does sort of have a string of people who've had issues with him. And so I'm sort of reserving judgment on that. Somebody can be a really nice guy most of the time and still be a jerk sometimes. And so Frank Langella, of course, I'm not sure what's going on with that either. But I think what the issue is here for both of these guys, and for other people as well, is that if somebody's been a jackass, let the punishment fit the crime, right? Fire him from one job, make the point. If you really don't want to work with them, don't work with them. But I don't think that. I don't think blacklisting people over single incidents without any sort of chance to, atone, redeem oneself, that sort of thing, and acknowledge that they've behaved badly, learn a lesson, because we all fall short. All of us, speaking as somebody who's just from a Christian background, we all sin, we all fall short. But we do try to, hopefully we try to do better. And what I see, and I think what Brian Cox is really nailing here, is that the cancel culture in Hollywood, as well as in politics, is really all about complete and total destruction of your enemies. And that to me is where it goes off the rails into McCarthyism. And it's one thing to have a bad opinion about something and get rebuked for it. It's another thing to say you can never work again because you've expressed this stupid opinion. I mean, Roseanne Barr is not one of my favorite people for a couple of reasons. One's personal because of a brief but intense Twitter war that we had between us. But I would never want her to not be able to earn a living. I mean, I just block her. I mean, let her go out and earn a living. Let her go out and be a comic or have a show. Okay, so she said something stupid. Well, tell everyone she said something stupid, but she should be able to earn. And so should Bill Murray. So should a lot of people who are going through the cancel culture process.
Yeah, the weird thing is when the Bill Murray thing happened, we like, well, when he was shooting What About Bob, he threw something at Richard Dreyfuss. Yeah, that was lousy and terrible.
Yeah,
that was also 30 years ago. And I mean, it's just weird. Let's bring up, and it happens almost every time. Well, in 2004, he said something untoward to one of his co-stars. I mean, at the end of the day, can we all have a bit of a thicker skin about stuff? And if you're dealing with a guy like Langella who's in his 80s and he calls you honey on set, can you let that slide? He's in a different generation.
Or just tell him, I don't want to be. Yeah. Don't use that language around me. And
Frank, I love you, but I don't appreciate that kind of. I'm a youngster. I don't like that language, and I can almost guarantee. Say, I'm so sorry.
Right.
I'm old dog, new tricks. I'm sorry. That thing, and you move on. But I think there's a currency here that scares me. That the younger generation, like, whoa. I'm a nobody, but I can tackle a Langella or a Murray. I don't know. I mean, and again, we also don't know the details and situations, which I think is very maddening. Yes. I think much more transparency would be better for everyone involved.
Well, I mean, I think that based on the tenor of the conversations that are going on, when we're talking about Langella and we're talking about Bill Murray, we're not talking about, what's reputed to be happening with Danny Masterson, or what has been reputed to happen with Danny Masterson, which is a whole completely different level, right?
Completely different, yeah.
Completely different level. We're not talking about criminal allegations, although chucking a 5-pound ashtray at somebody's head certainly might qualify, but I think 30 years, I think the statute of limitations is passed. And Ben Dreyfuss, by the way, who's Richard Dreyfuss's son, is on Twitter, who's actually really interesting. He has an interesting voice about this, and I think you actually include some of what Ben has to say in this. I mean, he says, this happened and it kind of sucked. I was only 5, so I was there, but he says, but in the end, What About Bob is a pretty good movie, so you should watch it.
I agree. I love that. My family and I watched it recently. We just had a great time.
Yeah. So, I think that you can separate the artist from the art, as what I'm saying. And if you absolutely can, if you're the one that has to work with the artist, that's, maybe a little different prospect, but then you do what Lucy Liu did, right? And who's finally come out and started talking about this publicly over the last couple of years. She just refused to work with the guy. Just say, I'm willing to do the show, but I'm willing to do the film, but I'm not going to put myself in that position again, and let the chips fall where they may. As it turned out, apparently Bill Murray also ticked off the director and a couple other people. So, apparently it worked out so that nobody had to put the band back together again. And Bernie, who was it? Bernie Mac ended up with the role in the sequel, which stunk anyway. So, yeah. So, what else is coming up at Hollywood and Toto? We're almost out of time here. I just love these conversations with you, Christian. So we're going to come back and do more of this as the summer rolls on. But what's coming up next for you guys?
Well, I just want to mention this week I spoke to Dave Rubin. It's a really smart, thoughtful guy for my podcast. It's called Right on Hollywood. It's coming out this week. So I hope you check that out. He has a new book out called not Don't Burn This Book, Don't Burn This Country, kind of the next level of where we are culturally. But I just think he's such an interesting voice. I think he's not a red meat flamethrower. I think he's very thoughtful. I think he's mature, and I think he's got a lot of wisdom. And I think a lot of things that he says are things that can bring, both sides together to a certain degree. There's division that can't be healed, but some of it can. And I think that I like to focus on that. So I hope people enjoy that conversation, because I know I did.
All right. Well, that's coming up at Right on Hollywood. Now, people can find that obviously at Hollywood and Toto, hollywoodandtoto.com. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts.
All the places at, iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcast, you should be able to find it there.
And people should subscribe. Just as they should subscribe to this one too, by the way.
Exactly. Do it for.
Subscribe to both. And
right.
And all right. Well, Christian Toto, thanks so much for being with us. Don't forget to go to hollywoodandtoto.com to read what Christian and his band of writers are doing over there. Some great work. And Right on Hollywood is his podcast. Be sure to download that. Be sure to subscribe to it. When we come back, we'll have more from the Ed Morrissey Show, so stay tuned. Hey folks, this is Ed Morrissey here. I wanted to say thank you for watching or listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. If you like what you watch or see, please be sure to subscribe to the channel on which you're watching or listening to this, either YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Rumble, Town Hall Media Player. Be sure to subscribe at any and all of those places so that you can find out when the next Ed Morrissey Show podcast will be dropping. Thanks again, and have a great week.